We've helped mosques with their security.
No touch! You touch once more, I stop you.
He's pretty big for someone who is just a local journalist. He's got 112,000 followers.
Everything I say is factual and I can back up. Sometimes I don't have the documents to back it up. You can either take my word for it or not.
It adds a weight to anything he says, even if there isn't that much substance to the claims he's actually making.
I think the key thing is it's always a kind of abstract bogeyman, it's always an abstract villain that allows these kind of rumours to percolate.
And for those smart enough to recognise this outcry for community and recognition, there are clicks to be gained, money to be made, and maybe even a place in a public office in the future.
It's accounts like Sibley's or like Craig Houston or like Saltire Rising that kind of compound on themselves and create this online reality, this kind of bubble of hate and division.
Because the struggles that a white kid in Postle Park is going through is very similar to the struggles that a brown girl with a hijab in Pollock Shields is going through.
Last year, we investigated different protests across Glasgow. We witnessed a political divide rarely seen in the city, with the left and right speaking louder than ever. Through our investigation into the rise of the far right in Scotland, we saw numbers flying around, claims being spread with little to no backing.
Roughly between 1 in 3 women are being raped by immigrants or sexually assaulted.
And dozens of content creators and live streamers around to spread those claims wide and far.
In our previous video, we focused on the political dissonance in Glasgow, but today we're digging into one of the reasons for that divide: misinformation. All over the city, we've seen communities in panic about the threat of migrants and the boundless crime that they bring with them, and further, the threat they pose to the preservation of Scottish culture as a whole. But when it comes to backing up their claims and justifying their sense of fear and outrage, the sources are not so credible. In this online age, it's easier than ever for misinformation to slip through the cracks and posing as fact and warping people's perceptions, sometimes even escalating into more serious abuse and harassment. But where does that come from? How has misinformation taken a hold of Glasgow, and how is it impacting the city? Enter Royston, a quiet district in the northeast of Glasgow, tucked behind the city centre. Once a church, then a youth community centre, had new owners. The Sala family would convert the vacant spot into a hotel for illegal immigrants. Or was it a homeless shelter? Either way, it doesn't matter, because it puts the community at risk with a primary school down the road and a Catholic church across the street. Except this wasn't true at all. Rather, a rumor prompted by the Facebook group Royston Safe that quickly agitated members of the public, who then rushed to tell their neighbors of the Sala family's plans. Seemingly overnight, 325 Royston Road turned the quiet community of Royston into what many believed was the next victim of uncontrolled mass migration. Royston locals gathered outside the property to protest. A local right-wing influencer caught news of the frenzy and made it part of his programming, with the video now tracking 65,000 views.
Well, let's speak now with the podcast host and the leader of the Social Democratic Party in Scotland, Craig Houston, who was at that protest last night.
Quickly, it escalated to a point where the property was broken into and windows were smashed overnight. It was more than influencers catching wind of the incident, as politicians, including MSP Paul Sweeney, stepped in.
I hadn't really been following much about it, to be honest with you, beyond just keeping tabs on what Royston Youth Action were up to. And then your kind of classic Facebook groups started sharing rumours about it being bought to convert the building into asylum accommodation. This seems to be a classic whipping up fear tactic by far-right agents within the community, primarily couched in sort of tropes which we're familiar with, which is, single fighting-age men, inherently culturally incompatible with our norms, are a sexual threat to children and women, are predatory by nature and upbringing and cultural background. So all of that innuendo is kind of charged within these rumours. The goal really there was to establish the facts rather than rumours. My goal was to sort of understand who the owner was and to meet with them. Turns out they're actually the couple that own Shawarma King. She was just like, we bought it as a fixer-upper and as like a nice project to do as a couple, and we wanted to try doing this kind of thing. It seemed like a fun idea, and she's like, I can't believe I've ended up embroiled in this nightmare. I think maintaining clear lines of communication is important, and that's why in the Royston case, just kind of getting to the nub of the issue very quickly and communicating that clearly on social media, bringing key representatives of the public into the room with the owner, and just being very like, here's the person, here's the community kind of leaders, explain your thought process and what you're doing with this building, and let's keep in touch with it. And that kind of calmed everything down.
We just spoke to someone that said they lived in the area, and I asked them if they knew about the building. They were very aware of the incident. They didn't want to be on camera. They were very suspicious of me when I first came up, but had heard of the incident, heard of the rumors. They were like, yeah, it was going to be an asylum hotel, and then it was going to be an Indian restaurant. Don't really know how it wrapped up in the end. They were ready to hear from the owners about the final plans, but I don't know, there was an air of suspicion anyway.
I think the key thing is it's always a kind of abstract bogeyman, it's always an abstract villain, it's always some mysterious entity which is unknown to the community, that allows these kind of rumours to percolate.
From Facebook groups to YouTube to the streets, how did a baseless rumour balloon into such a controversy, affecting the lives of businessmen and friction in the community? Was this really an anomaly, or the problem of misinformation boiling over? The outcry in Royston was far from the only incident to spiral for misinformation last year.
An example of that was in Easterhouse, where one of the former homeless accommodation shelters was burned to the ground a few months ago.
From the burning of buildings to trespassing on school property, we've seen various confrontations as the result of misinformation, with claims of asylum hotels popping up and schools being used to educate potentially dangerous foreigners, with no more evidence than people wandering Glasgow with a conspiracy to explain and a camera to film it. A quick glance into the online communities who fall for these conspiracies, as well as those who spread them, shows one major thing in common: a distrust in politics and those in power, leading down rabbit holes of conspiracy, and the silent majority preparing to rebel against the system. And for those smart enough to recognise this outcry for community and recognition, there are clicks to be gained, money to be made, and maybe even a place in a public office in the future.
It's worth note that this YouTuber, Craig Houston, made his formal entrance into politics this May election, gaining just under 2,000 votes for the Glasgow region.
The core issue is a low trust in politics, an inherent suspicion, and that's exploited by the far right in particular. And I think once you set that kind of very nihilistic kind of frame, it's easy to then fill it with, well, look what they're doing now. You know, that they know what's happening now. You know, they're going to have this old building going to be used to house these asylum seekers, and we know what they're like. You know, and it's going to be next to a primary school.
What you'll notice a lot of the time, especially in instances like Royston, is a lot of the organization happens over Facebook, and then leaders can also emerge over YouTube. So those kind of seem to be like the platforms. For example, we have this YouTube account, Saltire Rising. So this is an Aberdeen-based YouTube. They describe themselves as Aberdeen's boots-on-the-ground investigative channel. I dig into the city's HMOs to large accommodation sites, behaviors displayed. No spin, no filter, just raw, face-backed investigation. So again, like the kind of language we often see, which is like asserting that they are the truth, no bias, and kind of alluding to the fact that larger media is trying to sell you something else. And then, of course, as well, we've got a Buy Me a Coffee link, which is a way you can kind of tip them for their investigative work. Yeah, we have one incident here where we can witness locals harassing hotel staff with the justification of this investigation and even posing as asylum seekers themselves.
So in here, there's another asylum hotel. We don't know exactly what's going on. We can't speak to anyone. Sir, I am asylum. I am not making a video.
Why?
Yes, it's Facebook.
Close it off and leave.
Can I not record?
No, you can't record. It's not allowed in the hall.
Would you like me to leave?
Close off.
No touch. You touch once more, I stop you.
No problem.
No touch. It's okay, sir. You're okay. Can I ask how many asylum people are here?
Well, I'm going to be on the place because you assaulted me, yeah? assaulted you?
He did grab him, yeah.
No, I told him why are you recording me?
I know, but you didn't
But he's
ask him
not
to
allowed.
leave. You just grabbed him.
No. You grabbed my arm. No, I just told why are you recording? Grab my arm. Because you were not looking at me.
That's still assault if you don't say, hello, can you leave? You just grab him.
Look, there I can. I know. But so look, you're not looking at me, right? So does that mean I get to grab
This is an asylum hotel, guys.
So on a larger scale, we've got this other online figure called Andrew Sibley, and he's big on YouTube, but he's much bigger on Facebook, and his digital footprint takes him back to a carpet sales company, but that really doesn't seem to be all he's about now. Now he seems to be all about investigative journalism, or his brand of investigative journalism. So as we can see here on his Facebook, he's pretty big for someone who is just a local journalist. He's got 112,000 followers. His videos always rack in thousands of views, hundreds of comments, hundreds of likes. So there's a genuine influence and impact here. So he's pretty big on Facebook, but he always links his videos back to his website, which is JAOC Investigations for Just an Ordinary Citizen, with the tagline Truth and Justice. So you can already see the way that he's kind of portraying himself in a different light. He's not just your average man with a camera with something to say. He's an XL Media Group, he's an independent journalist. He's got this footage in the background of people in an office. Like, these are people always hard at work, there's always stuff going on, and immediately it just has an air of professionalism that you don't get from just your average person on Facebook, just filming themselves, maybe in their car, just chatting about their thoughts on different topics. And you scroll down a little bit, and you've got all these different investigations, these documents, resources. This is very professional looking, and it adds a weight to anything he says, even if there isn't that much substance to the claims he's actually making. However, despite the impressive detail and presentation of his work and his emphasis on speaking in facts sourced from legitimate protected whistleblowers.
Now, people ask me quite often, where do we get our information from? Well, clearly we don't hack organisations, because that would be illegal. We don't get that evidence from the authorities, because they tried to hide it. And where else can we get it? Whistleblowers. Now, whistleblowers who are protected work in these organisations. Police Scotland, for example, and I'll name how many we have. We have 4.
His claims are often backed up by an insistence of the truth, rather than any hard evidence, with many of his videos coming across as misleading.
Now, I digress. I want to recap on some things that I've made statements on over the last few weeks. Everything I say is factual and I can back up. Sometimes I don't have the documents to back it up. You can either take my word for it or not. But I'm factual.
Though he portrays himself as a force of authority with a team of experts behind him, his videos often utilise the same rhetoric and work from the same factual foundation as any other guy in a car with his camera. So take Sibley's recent expose on the asylum system from earlier this year. It's an article titled Inside the Home Office Asylum System, where he interviews someone called Ian, who claims to be a former Home Office caseworker now acting as a whistleblower to reveal the truth of how the system really works. And this poster that we've got here summarises the biggest claims, and right away you can tell that it is misleading. One of the biggest claims is even men on the sex offenders register are still considered for asylum. Followed deeper in the article, if we take a look at that, there's the even more shocking claim that, quote, if he's from Afghanistan, Eritrea, Sudan or Kuwait, we're not allowed to deny asylum, end quote. And that's just simply untrue, because following an amendment to the law by the Labour government in 2025, asylum seekers with sex offences are barred from receiving refugee protection. This is not questioned, Ian's not asked to elaborate, we just get this quote, it's presented as fact, the truth revealed, and that's all there is to it.
Say like anything about who he is, like in what department or?
No, all it really says is that he's worked in the Home Office for 18 years, he's worked in 19 centres, processed lots of applications, now he's speaking out and resigning. That's all you know about him.
Right.
You just know his first name, you get this picture attached, and apart from that, you just need to believe what he's saying, because now he's speaking out. And there's no more evidence than the stuff he says and Sibley's very minimal analysis of those claims.
Another investigation by Sibley that has gained some traction, garnering 34,000 views on Facebook, over 1,000 likes and 400 shares, announces his big investigation into the vape shop over by Central Station.
6:30 p.m. I'm just waiting on a contact in a town to bring me more information. We've been investigating child trafficking.
He claims that an anonymous source exposed him to evidence that the shop was not selling vapes, but instead grooming children, or a big network of grooming gangs operating out of vape shops.
And abuse of children by gangs from Glasgow, connected to Shettleston and to Lanarkshire and beyond. The investigation has shown a huge network, and our job was to present this information, obviously, to the authorities. But on Monday we learned that the vape shop which went on fire, there's some major connections there.
Interestingly enough, Channel 4 posted a similar story the day before, but about a town down south. And that story was then picked up by the Daily Express, and then coincidentally the day after, Sibley comes out with his video. So a trend of his investigations is he comes in with the mid-investigation updates that he posts to his followers, whilst he's in the action, so before anything's confirmed. He plants a seed in his followers' head about what might be happening, but never actually confirms. Promises a further update down the line, but never actually does so. But the fear and division is already planted in people's heads. There's already thoughts about, these gangs.
We don't do this just for anything else other than work with our skills to help stop children being abused and uncover more corruption. In this particular case, it's going to go big. So to reiterate to anybody that thinks it's clever, if you target me or others who work with us, and you have a Facebook profile or any other profile, just understand, we work to intelligence. You don't think that will save us finding out who you are.
So when it comes to JOAC, Andrew Sibley himself, we haven't seen actual escalation into the real world yet, no collective action or sort of activism. But the point is that it's videos or it's accounts like Sibley's or like Craig Houston or like Saltire Rising that kind of compound on themselves and create this online reality, this kind of bubble of hate and division, which is beginning to show its teeth in places like Royston, like the Easter House fires, and like the Central Mosque. And not to mention the lives of local refugees and asylum seekers.
There's a pattern within right-wing misinformation, not only in demonising immigrants, but using the Muslim community as a punching bag for abuse and fear-mongering. To gain a better understanding of the scope of hateful rhetoric and misinformation and how it's affecting local communities, I sat down with Omar, who works at the Glasgow Central Mosque. As mentioned previously, the mosque was vandalised last year with Islamophobic abuse. Months on, the graffiti remains, as does the issue of bigoted rhetoric for Glasgow's Muslim community.
And it was quite shocking actually to go out and to see that kind of message on the side of the building, particularly this building, given the history that it has in the city, and also given the nature of the message as well, where it said Scots first. Well, we think of ourselves as Scottish as well. We don't think of ourselves as apart from Scottish society. We're part and parcel of the history of the country and the story of the city as well. The community were deeply disappointed, but also it did add to a sense of a shifting narrative within the general population around attitudes towards Muslims and minority communities. It was actually just one event out of many that happened where Muslims and mosques had been targeted since Southport, and essentially at least once a month you're hearing of a mosque being attacked or an individual being attacked. And that's ranged from things like graffiti outside Glasgow Central Mosque to mosques being firebombed, for example. Somebody planned to actually carry out a mass casualty event or a terrorist attack on the mosque in Greenock. The person had, a rucksack full of weapons and things, and they were stopped just as they were about to enter into the mosque. And part of that is the anti-migrant sentiments that are there. So people are saying, for example, at the protests, they're saying stop the boats and ban Islam. So the two actually, are part of the same narrative that's being formed out there. Part of the response that we've had and kind of done as community leaders is first and foremost as we've helped mosques with their security. So our national body, the Association of Mosques, released a document advising mosques on how to secure their premises. We're also working with other organisations in terms of how individuals can stay safe as well. We're hearing more and more of people in the community starting to look at things like self-defence courses and whatnot. There needs to be political effort. There needs to be efforts to counteract some of the narratives in the media. And the media is more broad than what it used to be. So it's not just print and TV and radio. It's now podcasts. It's social media. It's accounts. It's a completely whole new arena, which is unregulated, and people can essentially go on, talk for an hour about what is essentially their own opinion and their own political viewpoint, but present it as if it's a fact. And that then influences people, in the general public and their attitudes and their opinions as well. If something does go viral, which isn't true, how do you actually then shut that down? Because it's gone viral, it's very difficult to actually take that back. Well, part of the solution is we need to humanise each other. There's a lot of struggle just now in communities, and it's very easy to point at somebody else and say it's their fault, rather than saying to the politicians, look, what are you doing about these issues? Because the struggles that a white kid in Postle Park is going through is very similar to the struggles that a brown girl with a hijab in Pollock Shields is going through. You've got socioeconomic issues there. In Postle Park it's generational. In Pollock Shields it's probably more around structural barriers. It's not fair that let's take the Postle Park example, that a kid in Postle Park has such a short life expectancy compared to a kid up the road in Milgai, for example, or in Pollock Shields. Your opportunities are more restricted than if you're somewhere more affluent like Shawlands. So we've got to level the playing field for everyone across the board, and we've got to make sure that our young people have those opportunities.
Misinformation has always been a threat to democracy, but in the online age we find ourselves in now, it seems more prominent than ever. We're all used to seeing people online who skew the truth and be selective about what information they share, but we think it's important to dissect the mechanisms by which misinformation spreads, then predictably spreads to the real world. As we can see here, it's happening in Glasgow, whether it be with the Royston incident, the fire in Easter House, or the vandalism at the Glasgow Central Mosque, and that's just a few examples. Through these conspiracy theories and paranoid discussions about what's being hidden from us, it's obvious to see there is a clear barrier between politicians and the communities they represent, fostering an environment of distrust that allows bad actors online to flourish, proclaiming that they have the real truth. But all this does is sow more division. Misguided fear in communities, vandalism and hatred, with the flames fanned by influencers who see an opportunity to grow their following by presenting as altruistic, truth-seeking, ordinary people, scapegoating minority groups and misinforming their viewers in the process.
The effects of misinformation can continue to impact Glasgow at a large scale if there's no intervention. So long as there are figures like Houston and Sibley to spread those skewed messages, and as long as they have a platform to gather clicks from, there's no reason to believe this path shouldn't continue. But if politicians in charge can reclaim any amount of trust from the public, then things could see a turn.